from the very first touch.
All the best, all the worst, 2021. Tomorrow.
That is the case, and the wind chill right now in Sioux Falls is 10. And one reason, again, is because the winds, they're not as strong as it was yesterday. We're looking at about 5 to 10 miles an hour or less. Here, though, a little stronger at 15 miles per hour. So high pressure tonight will keep us pretty dry, but we're going to watch this stationary boundary kind of drift over the area tomorrow. Now, we will clear out, so tomorrow's going to be another nice day, but we're going to see kind of a range in temperatures because behind this, the wind is going to be out of a northerly direction. Out ahead.
Reduces inflammation, thank the gods.
Don't thank them too soon.
Schools or grade levels to temporarily transition to a virtual learning posture as needed.
This is like a...
I'm on the air with...
Get your complimentary sample by texting FENCE to...
Hopefully, we're going to be on the northern end of that low pressure system, so we shouldn't have to worry much with that. And really, the impact meter through Thursday staying at the 0 level, none, because yes, we're going to deal with the cold, but no advisories or warnings are going to be issued, so we won't have to deal with that.
We believe helping dogs live their
system, but temperatures will be dropping throughout the day. 7 below Saturday morning, high of 5 degrees to ring in the new year. But then look at the temperature jump Sunday into Monday. We go to 25 and then 37 Monday and Tuesday, only to drop again towards the end of the 10-day forecast. Aberdeen, here's your 10-day forecast.
4 others. Authorities say the suspect, 27-year-old Sean Greer, was driving on a suspended license. A judge ordered him held without bond. 2 of the children injured remain in critical condition. The final Powerball drawing of the year takes place tonight. It is a big one. The jackpot has swelled to $441 million. And if you're the lucky winner and you choose the cash option, you will walk away with more than $317 million. That's before taxes. Still, not a bad way to ring in the new year. Up next, remembering an NFL legend, from coach to broadcaster to video game namesake.
If you can't watch the CBS Evening News.
I'm still drawn to...
Doesn't mean you can't grow. Why can't you grow? Because you hold me back.
Meantime, Mark, as we're talking about all the different things, testing, and we've been talking about getting the tests out, you can't get the home tests. And then if you get the antigen test that the administration sends out, now there are questions about whether it works or not with Omicron. Take a listen.
The antigen test may not perform as well as it had for prior variants, the Alpha variant and the Delta variant, but it's still picking up quite a bit of infection. So a really, really helpful tool. If you have a negative antigen test and you have symptoms, then you should go ahead and get that PCR test.
If you don't have enough tests to go around, and that's clearly the situation we're in now, then don't issue broad guidance telling everybody to test. We've got to move.
A lot. Oh, it's so touching to see that. It meant everything to me. I mean, that's so touching. Oh my God.
What these cartels are doing is they take advantage of these huge migrant influxes that are crashing our border and overwhelming border.
She gets crunchy and juicy. Get them today for only $3.99.
Now more important than ever.
My interest, I was being welcomed into the Senate family, and he wanted to make sure that we accomplished great things in the Senate, but he wanted each member to be part of that. So he was a great leader, a person, a great friend of mine. I'm going to miss him dearly, and I can tell you he was truly unique. You're not going to...
An immediate cash payment.
We thought...
To him a couple of times over the past year. He always knew where Harry Reid stood on just about any issue. All right, Senator Ben Cardin, thanks so much for your time. Stay safe. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
And up next, he was the voice of football and much more. We'll discuss John Madden's unexpected death and what made him such a legend.
Temperatures will slowly try to warm as we go into Sunday, but be aware of another round of cold later next week.
Menards carries a great selection of Richmond water heaters to ensure that you have hot water when you need it. With high-efficiency models and tankless options to choose from. Your
credit score.
Revealing the fossil of a giant millipede. The creature, named Arthropleura, dates back 326 million years. Scientists gather that it would have weighed about 110 pounds, 22 inches wide, more than 8 feet long. No thank you to all of that. The fossil is set to go on display at the Sedgwick Museum in Cambridge, England next year.
You love bugs, Brian.
Where is the Reid? Do you have a bottle large enough for that?
His influence and his humor were felt on and off the field. CBS's James Brown on Madden's incredible career.
I first knew of John Madden when I saw the passionate young coach leading the Oakland Raiders, the bad boys of the NFL, in the early 1970s. Madden was a player's coach who did not have many rules. He simply said, be on time, be prepared, and play like heck when I tell you to. That led Oakland to 7 AFC titles and a Super Bowl championship in 1977.
And the Raiders have won. They are the world champs.
Madden then took his love of the game to the broadcast booth.
Hi, I'm John Madden. Pat Summerall and I have been with both the teams all week.
Teaming up with the unselfish Pat Summerall to call games on CBS and then to Fox and NBC Sports for 30 years, earning 16 Emmys along the way.
We call it just BGD, just big guy defense, that's all.
John Madden never stopped coaching football. For millions of Americans, he took a complicated game, made it fun and easier to understand.
They bring from the outside and boom, 2 up the middle.
He became a national pitchman, endorsing several products.
Boom, tough acting, Tinactin.
And later a video game Hall of Famer. He kicked off a revolution in the industry, creating a game with EA Sports, the groundbreaking football franchise, Madden NFL. His voice, his smile were infectious, and his fear of flying was legendary. When John Madden pulled up to the stadium in his tour bus, the Madden Cruiser, everyone knew that this was the game of the week. The game was John Madden, and we were all better having the opportunity to work with and learn from him. James Brown, CBS News, New York.
And we'll be right back.
Look what I can do. Am I made of wood? How would we be able to tell? I hate this. Anderson, the snowflakes are tequila. I may never leave.
New Year's Eve Live with Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen on CNN.
It's time for our lowest.
Win a new Trailblazer or gas for a...
Glasses.
Allergic reactions to its ingredients or to a previous dose. An increased risk of Guillain-Barré.
0% interest until January 2025 on all smart beds. Ends January 3rd.
Coach of the Panthers, longtime defensive.
Thing to note that anybody under the age of 50 really has no firsthand recollection of him as a coach. And yet, younger people definitely know who John Madden is, either through his broadcasting career or through the commercials. I mean, he was not just an important football figure. He was a part of American pop culture.
John Madden was the man. I mean, as a high school coach for myself at the time, and being a Bay Area guy my whole life, you know, he was special. You know, I think young people, young guys who were...
Name of one of the most successful video game franchises in history, John Madden, has died at the age of 85, and sports analyst Mike Golick joins us now to remember John Madden. Mike, I mean, you know, so much to talk about. There's just no way we're going to cram it all into this segment, but simply put, he was the voice of football. He made it so relatable to people around the country. What did he mean to you?
Oh, listen, it was so much to me because while I was born and raised in Cleveland, the Oakland Raiders were my team growing up. He took over that team in '69. I was about 8 years old up until about I was going to high school. So he was the coach of the team that I loved. And then when he was broadcasting games through my college years and then my entire NFL career, 1984, the All-Madden team came into being right before I got into the NFL. Let me tell you, Jim, guys loved making it to the Pro Bowl, but if you made the All-Madden team, and that team, young generation, if you don't know, Google this, man. If you had blood on your uniform, blood on your face, dirt all over yourself, snot bubbles all over the place, you were making the All-Madden team, and you wanted to make the All-Madden team. And then to be part of his EA Madden sports game, which started in '88 but really took off, I think, more in '90. I mean, this was all during the height of my career. Just him calling games, Jim, he did it in just a natural way, you know, boom, bang, bang, right. You know, I mean, he just had a ball doing it. He was just himself.
And he talked to you about it like he was a guy on the bar stool next to you or your uncle on the couch at home. John Madden commented on football, as you said, in life, and had an incredible sense of humor. We have one of his clips, and there are so many clips. This is obviously not the greatest of all time Madden clip, but it's just a clip that demonstrates what it was like listening to John Madden call a game. He would talk about some of the activity on the sideline. Let's take a look.
I'm looking as close as I can, and I can't see any beard, but that's a 4-day beard, isn't it?
It's a passive attempt.
No, it's very, very passive.
Here's Terry Allen. Out to about the 20. There it is.
See, now here it is, but see, I mean, he got a little in here and a little up there here, but he doesn't have anything here at all. Watch, when you take it off, he doesn't have anything going up in there.
He's talking about Troy Aikman can't grow a beard. You know, he's using the telestrator.
The telestrator, I mean, he really brought that into play, and just not on football. Jim, the best thing I can say about him was he didn't get bogged down in terminology of the game, and you said it right. He was like sitting next to you on a bar stool talking to you about football. The best two words I can use about him was he was a football guy, and he will so be missed. And by the way, loved going through that Madden Cruiser. That was a really cool bus.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, in terms of his lasting legacy, what do you remember the most, do you think?
Oh, I think what I'll remember is just how he relayed the game to everybody. That's what you want when millions of people are sitting and watching a game. How do you take in a game? You could tell his pure passion and joy for the game. He just wanted to talk football, and that was it, and that came across.
And, of course, Pat Summerall, the way he would always say, and join us for 60 Minutes and Murder, she wrote. He would always do that as well. Yeah. Sports analyst Mike Golick, thanks for joining us, talking about John Madden. We appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for watching. Aaron.
Hours ago to issue subpoenas in the impeachment case against Attorney General Jason Ravnsborg. That was one of the developments of 2 days of behind-closed-door meetings of the House committee.
Young women to be sexually abused by the now-deceased millionaire. The British socialite found guilty on 5 counts after her accusers took the stand. The highest daily rate of COVID in the U.S. ever. States calling up the National Guard to help. Nearly a third of New York City's EMS workers out sick. But even as cases skyrocket, hospitalizations haven't yet. The new data that Omicron is likely less severe than Delta. And new information from the CDC on when people are most contagious.
Most of your transmission potential happens in those 1 to 2 days before you have symptoms.
Holiday travel nightmare. Nearly 1,000 flights canceled today. The massive pileup in Wisconsin as severe weather begins to roll through the southeast. High stakes call. President Biden set to talk with Vladimir Putin tomorrow as fears grow that Russia will invade Ukraine. Why did the Russian president request the call? Truly free returns. The secret policy at some major retailers that lets you keep the item you want to give back and the refund. And the tributes pouring in for 2 towering figures. We remember former Senate leader Harry Reid and NFL great John Madden.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. I'm Kristen Welker in for Lester. After the death of Jeffrey Epstein, the world has watched and waited as a jury deliberated for days about what would happen to his confidant, Ghislaine Maxwell. Tonight, they have found her guilty on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking of minors. Let's get right to Ron Allen, who is outside the courthouse.
Tonight, after 6 days of deliberation, a jury found Ghislaine Maxwell guilty of 5 out of 6 federal charges, including sex trafficking of minors, which is the most serious and carries up to 40 years behind bars.
The road to justice has been far too long, but today, justice has been done.
Throughout the 3-week trial, prosecutors calling 24 witnesses. The heart of their case, 4 women who say they were recruited, groomed, and lured by Maxwell when they were teenagers so they could be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. The prosecution calling Maxwell Epstein's partner in crime, saying Epstein was able to sexually abuse young girls because Maxwell was the key to the whole operation. Jurors were reminded that she lived with him for years and was even referred to as the lady of the house. Prosecutors tying the pair by showing pictures of them together throughout the years, adding Maxwell received more than $30 million from Epstein during the years her alleged crimes were committed. The defense trying to discredit the 4 women, questioning their memory, telling jurors they were coerced by attorneys and motivated by money. Epstein took his own life behind bars in 2019, but his presence looming over the courtroom. The defense reminded the jury to separate Maxwell from the disgraced financier, saying Ghislaine Maxwell is not Jeffrey Epstein. Adding she's been tried here for being with Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe that was the biggest mistake of her life, but that was not a crime. The jury felt otherwise, and the crimes they deemed her guilty of tonight could leave the 60-year-old in prison for the rest of her life. Maxwell was taken directly back to prison. She'll be sentenced at a later date. She also still faces 2 counts of perjury, and prosecutors must decide whether they'll move forward and try her on those charges as well. Kristen?
Ron Allen on the breaking news tonight. Now to our other top story. The numbers are just staggering as COVID cases skyrocket across the U.S. The 7-day average in the U.S. now topping 260,000 new cases per day. That's a new high. Last week alone, there were 1.8 million new cases nationwide. But the president's top advisor, Dr. Fauci, also offered a dose of encouraging news today. While the Omicron variant appears to be highly contagious, hospitalizations are not yet rising as steeply as cases. He also pointed to new studies that suggest the variant seems less severe than Delta. Carrie Sanders has more from Miami.
Tonight, a disturbing 60% surge in daily COVID cases compared to last week. The hyper jump in numbers largely due to Omicron, according to the CDC.
It's hard right now. I hope people can do their part, get vaccinated.
Dr. Jeff Polov in Wisconsin says new COVID patients will likely spend the night in the ER because his hospital is at capacity.
Many of them will be unvaccinated. They'll have regrets. Some will even ask that they can be vaccinated tonight, but I'll have to let them know that it's too late.
Joining medical teams on the front lines, more than 13,000 National Guard troops deployed across 48 states.
I just want to make sure I'm safe.
Dr. Fauci says studies suggest Omicron is less severe than Delta. One out of South Africa showed fewer admissions to the ICU, fewer patients in need of supplemental oxygen, and shorter hospital stays for those infected with Omicron compared to other waves. Still, many are questioning why the CDC abruptly cut quarantine from 10 to 5 days. Those who work in close contact with the public worry they are now more likely to be exposed.
We have policies that are putting this pandemic on the backs of the frontline workers rather than supporting us.
In New York, 30% of the fire department's EMS is out sick today. This morning, the CDC's Dr. Rochelle Walensky defending the new guidelines.
We have seen relatively low rates of isolation for all of this pandemic. Some science has demonstrated less than a third of people are isolating when they need to. And so we really want to make sure that we had guidance that people were willing to adhere to.
She says that according to the CDC's most recent data, people are most infectious 1 to 2 days before symptoms appear and 2 to 3 days after. So these 5 days are when you'd be the most contagious, and according to the CDC, when up to 90% of COVID transmission occurs. 5 days after you test positive is when the CDC's new isolation rules would end if you're asymptomatic. Not only would symptoms have likely gone away by then, but the CDC says so too would the likelihood of transmitting the virus. Dr. Walensky was also pressed on why no test is required to confirm an all clear.
That antigen test was actually not authorized for this purpose. Its information would not be useful. Regardless of what the antigen test said, we would say you still need to wear your mask for 5 days.
Complicating things, the FDA now says those antigen home tests, which have been in short supply, are also less able to detect Omicron. Lauren Johnson recently took 4 of them after being exposed. They came back negative. Still, she got a PCR.
My PCR test was positive.
Your antigen tests are still a better option than nothing. They're just limited in their sensitivity. You can have what's called a false negative. That could give you a false sense of confidence.
And Carrie Sanders joins us now.
Online event is January 25th. You can find out more information about the meetings at dakotanewsnow.com.
Beth Warden, thank you. A coronavirus update now here in South Dakota. The Department of Health reporting 944 new COVID-19 cases. The active case count shows a significant increase to nearly 7,900. Hospitalizations also rose. They now sit at 237. The number of South Dakotans who have received at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine is now at nearly 68%.
A regional grocery chain is stepping up its security. Hy-Vee announced today the creation of a new retail security team. The team will be introduced to stores across the 8-state region. The officers will be present during operating hours and will be trained to defuse situations and protect customers as well as employees. There are a few officers already located at certain stores, with more in training to serve in the near future. After 2 days, the lead in the
For the first part, there's no question that, again, just based on the prevalence of the community or the burden, if you will, in the community of disease that we're seeing, patients have a variety of conditions that also concurrently happen to be COVID positive. So are certainly being hospitalized for conditions unrelated to COVID, but happen to have COVID at the same time. So there's no question.
I've been sounding the alarm on our feckless and incompetent military elites for years.
Hoping that's what happens. It hasn't been officially set in stone, but the arguments are all there. We're not as white or all white as Iowa or New Hampshire or some state like Minnesota.
Does the timing of the vaccine mandates in these cities make sense to you from a medical perspective? Is there a medical reason to delay implementing these mandates on an emergency basis?
A pay cut, completely revamped.
To dude that size, you better move him. You better get him.
Let us know, see how we can help you out with that, because we don't want those animals out in the cold any more than they want to be there.
In Sioux Falls, Renee Ortiz, KELO News.
And if you have a pet who has a lot of energy, there are things I have one of those. Yeah. You can do inside.
Yeah, one of the things you can do is you can hide the treats somewhere, and then they have to work to find them. Yeah, and get some exercise.
I know, we're really missing those walks right now. Yeah. It's too cold for me. For more ways to keep your pets entertained, check out this story on KELOLAND.com. Well, the colder the weather also means it's time to lace up your skates. We check out opening day for the Sioux Falls ice rinks next.
And tomorrow's temps not too bad. We'll actually be warming to normal here in southeastern KELOLAND, but cold air returns starting on Friday. Details next.
Because the supply is gone. How are patients reacting, and are most of them unvaccinated?
We are seeing lots of patients come in for monoclonal antibody. We're seeing vaccinated patients who feel like they have the flu and they just want something to make them feel better and wish that we could give them more than Tylenol and Advil and fluids. And then we're seeing unvaccinated people who are very sick and they're scared and they want a treatment that we no longer have available. And when we look at those patients in the eyes, honestly, there's a conversation that you have with them, which is, this is what I have for you today, and you need to come back if you feel worse, and then we can take care of you in the hospital. But then there's also the conversation for their family, and that goes back to the question you just asked Dr. Reiner. What else are we doing? We have to vaccinate people who are unvaccinated right now. We have to continue to mask and slow down the spread, and all of those things occur, and treatment is a last priority. It's a priority for those who are sick, but we have to keep from getting there, and that's through vaccination and masking.
Yeah.
Almost all the pilots are currently working if they're available.
Winter weather wreaking havoc in the skies and on the roads. Icy roads causing this 4-mile backup in Wisconsin. And more storms are in the forecast. 20 million Americans under severe weather alerts, with the southeast bracing for strong winds, hail, and tornadoes. A possible tornado already causing minor damage in southern Georgia. But some relief for the west. Warmer temperatures are on the way as travelers hope for an end to this holiday nightmare.
Everyone hoping for an end to that. And Steve joins us now from the Los Angeles International Airport, and they're already canceling flights for the days ahead, Steve?
Yeah, Kristen, by all accounts, more pain is predicted. FlightAware already tracking more than 500 cancellations for tomorrow and nearly 100 cancellations already for Friday. And by the way, this is all on top of another storm system moving in right here to Southern California. Kristen?
The headaches and the frustrations persist. All right, Steve Patterson, thank you for that. Well, still ahead, the surprise announcement at the White House. President Biden set to talk with Vladimir Putin tomorrow.
As a new small business owner.
The Congressional Budget Office predicts the law will reduce health insurance premiums, but several medical groups have sued the federal government, challenging a provision aimed at determining fair payment for services by out-of-network providers. Regardless, the lawsuit is not expected to stop the core of the law from moving forward.
The new year is almost upon us, and now is a good time to look back at the area's most popular baby names. Both Avera and Sanford have released their top 5 lists of most popular names. At Avera, names that begin with L top the list, with Lillian for girls and Lucas for boys. Avera also pointed out that Charles and Oliver ended in a tie. On the Sanford side, Amelia and Oliver top their respective lists. It's the second year in a row that Amelia has topped the list. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
Don't miss Conley.
A federal bankruptcy court has blocked opioid lawsuits from proceeding against Purdue Pharma and its owners, the Sackler family, at least until February 1st. That is to give the various parties time to negotiate a new settlement. Earlier this month, a separate federal judge rejected the initial settlement of thousands of lawsuits. She found that it improperly shielded the Sacklers from legal action. And on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 90 points to close at 36,488. The Nasdaq fell 15 points. The S&P 500 added 6, reaching a record close. Still to come on the News Hour, China's continuing crackdown on press freedom in Hong Kong. Why the Republican Party is paying former President Trump's legal bills. Looking back at the life and legacy of Hall of Fame coach John Madden, and much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
To enfranchise themselves. And just going back to the prior point, thank you for pointing that out, Morley. When the 26th Amendment was ratified, and
differentiate the two, and I think so much of that is because they themselves separate their views.
Are preying on young teenage girls, and there's been this correlation with the surge in mental problems and challenges of teenage girls in the United States, related back to these algorithms in TikTok. And so you wonder, what is China doing? What are these nefarious things reaching into the minds and the hearts in American homes and into our teenagers? Close down, shut down that app. If the U.S. government isn't going to protect your children, you have got to do it. I mean, but to Gordon's point, this idea that China is simply too big to fail, like a nuclear equipped Enron, of this giant corporation with nuclear weapons, essentially. And there's nothing that the United States can do to disentangle itself from it. It's simply not true. I mean, we need to have an agenda. Like you said, Ben, we have to handle this internal domestic problems in the United States and the external threats. They're really entangled. We have to have a Norman Rockwell agenda, I think, here at home that strengthens the American family, and a Rockwell B-1 bomber agenda abroad that shows American military strength. And we need to deter military aggression from the Chinese Communist Party against Asia, because as soon as they have Asian hegemony, they can spread it throughout the region.
Supermarket chain executives of profiting from inflation. This was out of the Hill. Giant grocery store chains force high food prices onto American families while rewarding executives and investors with lavish bonuses and stock buybacks. I'm demanding they answer for putting corporate profits over consumers and workers during the pandemic. Is this a opening salvo for 2024 or a cry for relevancy?
I'm not certain what this is going to end up being. I think that a lot of people recognize that when it comes to grocery stores, there's increased demand, and some of these grocers are trying to recoup losses that they experienced during the pandemic. I'm not certain Elizabeth Warren sort of stalking the aisles of Kroger's or Publix looking for, 2 or 3 cent increases here or there is actually what's going to get the public to think about, what's actually causing inflation. Because while Warren is making that liberal populist argument about how some of these businesses are soaking consumers, Republicans can just take a step back and say, no. It's not the private sector. It's not the oil and gas industry that you've already blamed, or meat producers that you've already also blamed, or grocers. No, it's the fact that on COVID, this administration has spent more adjusted for inflation than we did during the Second World War and to rebuild Europe. That's the two kind of messages that I think that would be employed here. And look, inflation is already confusing enough. I'm not sure that this is going to be the way to win that argument.
This is what a
long three on the way. This one won't go. Heat check there for Wendell.
It's your turn to get the peace of mind that.
See where it takes you.
Governor Kristi Noem, historic energy demands, and the Sturgis rally were some of the most viewed. You can find a complete list of the top 12 most viewed KELOLAND.com originals online right now.
Still to come on KELOLAND News at 6. Corsica Stickney standout Avery Broughton is back on the floor for the Jaguars. We'll have that story next in sports.
Of justice for these victims, not just the 4 victims who testified in this trial, but the dozens of victims who were abused, many of them as children, by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. It took far too long. Let's also remember, federal prosecutors down in Florida, Alexander Acosta, they had Jeffrey Epstein lined up over a decade ago, and they let him go with an inexplicable slap on the wrist because they didn't have the guts to take on a rich, powerful person like Jeffrey Epstein and his powerhouse legal team. And we've only seen justice today because of bold local reporting down in Florida and because my former office, the Southern District of New York, did the right thing. So this is a big day for justice. I think the jury clearly was very careful and did its job and delivered a fair and just verdict.
Michelle, let me read you part of the statement on this verdict from the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams, whose team prosecuted this. He says, quote, "The road to justice has been far too long, but today justice has been done. I want to commend the bravery of the girls, now grown women, who stepped out of the shadows and into the courtroom. Their courage and willingness to face their abuser made this case and today's result possible." Again, Jeffrey Epstein allegedly died by suicide in his jail cell before he could face trial. What does this mean for the victims to actually see the justice system play out fully for them?
Poppy, this is huge for the victims. I prosecuted a lot of child abuse cases, and this verdict is going to provide a lot of healing for a lot of victims out there because this jury believed these 4 victims. So I think it's going to empower a lot of other victims out there, men and women who have been abused and trafficked, to come forward and reveal the secrets and let go of the shame that they've been carrying for years.
Ellie, the jury
bonus cash on room with additional housing available for spouses.
Sex acts. I wonder what you make of that, given that the most serious count that carries up to 40 years in prison, sex trafficking of a minor, she was found guilty on.
Yeah, so those 2 counts, Poppy, relate to the same testimony from the same victim. And I think the jury just shows how careful they were. They may have had some problem with whether there was technically enticement or versus technically transporting. There was some inconsistency as to those specific elements in this trial. But again, it shows me the jury didn't just sort of sweep the table and say all guilty, all not guilty. And when this case is on appeal, and it will be appealed, as a prosecutor, you want to be able to say to the Court of Appeals, look, the jury was really careful here. They were very selective about what they did.
Michelle, the defense...
And very thorough.
And the defense, Michelle, argued that Maxwell was being scapegoated for Epstein's actions. I wonder, as someone who has stood up and been a voice for so many victims, what you made of that?
Well, they're trying to shift the blame to someone else. It's another case, just like the Elizabeth Holmes case, where the defense is trying to blame the evils of a man on a woman. So I think it's a big day for a lot of victims out there.
Ellie, legally,
she says Target issued her a full refund, advising her to donate, recycle, or keep the item.
It caught me off guard, but I was happy with it because I got my money and a product.
Policies like these are not guaranteed, though, so check store return rules online, in the apps, or call customer service.
They may take it back, they may not. But for customers shouldn't go in to this thinking, oh, well, we'll be able to keep this, because, that could be considered a scam.
Companies hoping to save money and keep customers happy as return season kicks into overdrive. Joe Fryer, NBC News.
Donating always a good option, right? Well, when we come back, John Madden, larger than life, the tributes today for an NFL giant.
Most bladder leak pads were similar.
Delta, the first airline asking for the change, applauded the move, calling it a safe, science-based, and more practical approach based on what we now know about the Omicron variant. Labor unions are pushing back on the changes, worried their members are being forced to return to unsafe conditions.
Several of the airline labor group unions have said that they are concerned that the reduction in the isolation time means that employees who are sick could be put back at work.
The already stressed system is expected to be challenged even more with the upcoming busiest travel days of January 2nd and 3rd.
Statistically, there are people here with COVID, right? So I think we take a risk anytime we go somewhere.
The director of the CDC, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, told NPR the question of requiring vaccinations for domestic flyers has been a topic of conversation, but is not something they're revisiting right now. Rhiannon Alley, ABC News, New York.
And keep it right here. We'll have a final check of your primetime forecast. That's when we come back.
Next wheel. Associated with the protests from 2019 and 2020. What's your response to that?
Most of the violence were coming from the police itself, and none of these police are being held accountable. The fact that Hong Kong people are not as vocal as before, not because they are satisfied, but because their rights are being deprived.
If I asked you this next question and you were in Hong Kong and you answered, you'd be breaking the law, but because you're in the UK, you can answer it. What do you think the West should be doing right now?
The West has to step up. I think the 2019 protest movement really awakened the whole world. We have growing awareness of the genocide behavior in Xinjiang, the human rights violation in Hong Kong, and the military intimidation to Taiwan. We are moving towards a much more assertive policy towards their growing aggression.
But at least publicly, that
always discreet. Question.
It's touched last.
Factor in things such as compassion or mercy. In Afghanistan, General McChrystal used to preach about courageous restraint. And there are times when you shouldn't pull the trigger.
With a home and a rest.
It's always the wind, right? When the wind is calm.
I guess the flip side of this is that if the Chinese and the Russians and the Turks already are going to be using these and making them better, can we afford not to have them?
I'd say two things. One, I hope and trust that the National Security Agency and Cyber Command are working hard on how to hack them and turn them back at our adversaries if they use them against us. And two, in World War II, the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese were willing to use more ruthlessly efficient methods than we were, and we still beat them in the end. America can't be beaten a day. We have to stay true to our
in half.
It just seems to me like
and just hang on a little while longer. More treatment is coming.
Over 50 years of experience, the Dakota News Now.
The Sleep Number 360 smart bed is temporary.
Cash for the holidays due to high vehicle demand. Billion Chevrolet need.
Yes, you'll know exactly.
Influential people in the game. Madden died yesterday at 85 and leaves a legacy that stretches from the field to the broadcast booth and beyond. Harry Smith takes a look back at his remarkable life.
Okay, come on, defense! Let's start off and stay after the whole.
John Madden was bigger than the game of football. He had the unrivaled ability to translate the arcane intricacies of X's and O's and turn them into fun.
They had a baby bucket, so this is a baby bucket. I guess that clears up the question as to whether they're married or not. And boom, bam!
Al Michaels shared the broadcast booth with Madden for 7 seasons.
It's just super football. I mean, I love these kinds of games.
He loved the game like nobody has ever loved the game of football, and you knew it. And he was excited. And he was excitable, and people just gravitated to him.
But before he became a broadcasting legend, Madden coached the Oakland Raiders to 10 consecutive winning seasons and a Super Bowl victory. His teams were notable in their day for their off-field freedom and their relentless play.
When they go out in the field, you go after everything in sight.
For the demonstrative Madden, football was a game to be played, to be coached with enthusiasm. When Madden moved to the broadcast booth, he took that same almost manic energy with him.
Boom, we cross him. The left goes to the right goes to the left. This guy crosses here, he crosses here. They have no idea where we are, who we are, where we're coming from, or who we're throwing to.
Audiences loved it.
Now this is what the game of football is all about.
And advertisers, too.
Like I was saying, light beer tastes great.
But hidden beneath those gesticulations was a scholar just a few hours short of a PhD in education. Madden could pique the interest of even the most reluctant fan. Of Madden, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell writes, "Nobody loved football more than Coach. He was football." And the Raiders said this of Madden: his impact on the game, both on and off the field, was immeasurable. Young people know Madden as the name of a wildly successful video game. For the rest of us, he was a wonderful, one-of-a-kind broadcaster who had us with this word.
That's what I say.
Harry Smith, NBC News, New York.
He will be missed by football fans and everyone else, too. That is Nightly News for this Wednesday. I'm Kristen Welker. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe and have a very good night.
This is America's Most Watched Network. This is NBC.
Do you remember where we...
Fashion, family values.
Yankee Stadium.
The Democratic firebrand settled in Henderson for his final years with his high school sweetheart and wife of 62 years, Landra. Reid battled pancreatic cancer for years. He was 82 years old. For more on the life and legacy of Harry Reid, we're joined by his friend Guy Cecil, a Democratic strategist and chairman of the Political Action Committee, Priorities USA. He worked with Reid as executive director of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. Guy, one thing I know about Harry Reid is he was a viewer of this program, so I want to send my condolences to his family, but also to you for the loss of your friend. I want to ask right off the top about his legacy. Former President Obama revealed what he wrote Harry Reid in his last letter to him today, and he wrote, quote, "I wouldn't have been president had it not been for your encouragement and support." What is Reid's political legacy?
Well, you know, I think Senator Reid had a chance to work with two history-making leaders, the first black president of the United States and the first woman Speaker of the House. And a lot of times his legacy gets overshadowed. The reality is that Senator Reid, as President Obama correctly stated, helped pass Wall Street reform and the stimulus bill and the Affordable Care Act. He was the reason why the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell wasn't delayed and was in fact overturned. And you know, a lot of it is of course wrapped up in legislation, but for those of us that knew Senator Reid, a lot of his legacy is in the people that he worked with and that worked for him, and that feel compelled every day to live up to a standard that he set for us, which was to take the work seriously, but not always to take ourselves so seriously. And so for a lot of us, it's not just a loss for the country, but the loss of a really good friend and mentor.
Part of that.
No gloves.
certain way.
He was on the ASUN
Girl MV Cheese Fan Contest. This season, ESPN and Cheez-It wanted to celebrate what makes college football so special. The fans who have the most absurd dedication and rituals for their teams every Saturday. This year's inaugural winner.
Again, thank you, Leland.
Thank you. Good to see you, sir. A Florida police chief is looking to recruit new officers in a place you may not expect. We'll tell you where they're recruiting and why they think they have a chance when we come back.
Book.com.
Lunchables, built to be eaten.
Thing that drove the people that worked for him a little bit crazy.
The bands. Clemson out there, of course.
Extra pass and an easy finish there.
There is one scene that requires dancing mushrooms.
An entire system rigged against the people. President Trump says the election was stolen, and he's right.
I think Trump won. I think Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, all of those states need to be fully investigated, and none of them have.
David, what do you make of that?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Running on the idea that you refuse to accept a legitimate election result should be disqualifying for office. But inside a Republican primary in today's Republican Party, which is dominated by Donald Trump, where a majority of Republicans say they believe Trump's big lie, it actually may be a credential. And there's no doubt the two guys you just played there clearly trying to curry favor with the president. Now, it's not clear that the former president is going to get involved and make an endorsement in that Ohio Republican Senate primary, but it is the kind of race where he can prove to some degree that he still has clout in the party potentially. And that's his whole mission here. Either he wants political retribution, like, hey, Lisa Murkowski's the only senator up for election who voted to convict me in my impeachment trial, so I'm going to make this conditional endorsement of the governor. It has nothing to do with the governor. That's purely about Trump political retribution. Or he wants to make the party in his image with real loyalists.
Governor Whitman, across the country, people pushing Trump's lies about 2020 are now running, as we were just talking about, for crucial election positions, right? Running elections. And Trump is endorsing them, hoping they'll do his bidding on the state level. We'll never forget that call, right, between Trump and Georgia officials. Talk about how consequential that is, because I feel like at the state house level, a lot of this doesn't get covered nationally until it's done.
Until it's too late. And that's really what's critical here, is to keep reminding people how important these elections are and these offices are. I mean, these are people who just were doing their job. They weren't playing to Republicans or Democrats as secretaries of states, as local officials who were doing the ballot counting. And yet they're being threatened. Their lives are being threatened. They've had to go into hiding, some of them. I mean, this just is not the United States of America. This isn't the way we behave. And people at the local level have to keep watching this and have to inform themselves and ask the questions, because you don't want somebody in office who is still saying 2020 election was fraudulent. It wasn't. It was free, fair, and accurate. And over 60 court cases have proven that over and over again. But this is part of a concerted effort to undermine the public's confidence in our electoral system. And it's to try to make it easier to change the outcome of an election if you don't win. And people have to be really concerned. There are over 200 bills that have been introduced across the country to reduce access to the polls for those who legally can vote, and to threaten people who are poll watchers, making it a criminal offense if you make a small mistake. When you're talking to people about how to vote, when you're writing down their names, it's making it so confusing that a lot of the people who know what to do are saying, hey, I didn't sign up for this. And we're losing them. And we're losing institutional knowledge. And Arkansas passed a bill that basically will allow the state legislature, if they didn't like the outcome of an election, to overturn it.
Look, states are supposed to be laboratories of democracy, right? That's what the founders intended. Right. But they need to uphold the democracy. And key to that is everyone being able to vote. David, changing.
Remain in isolation after a positive test. NBC's Chris Malone with the story.
A day after the nation registered a record amount of new COVID-19 cases, the head of the CDC is defending the agency's new guidance on isolation for people who test positive. 5 days instead of 10 if symptoms have disappeared.
Ready to feel fulfilled at the
It's those very same mothers for conditions arising from poverty. The money can be used really however states want, as long as it's broadly defined, helping people in poverty, and that's why we looked state by state from New Mexico to Utah to Arizona.
Well, let's talk about New Mexico, because one of your reports focused on single mothers in New Mexico, and one of TANF's requirements, which is a federal requirement, that these mothers give information about their children's father when they're applying for funds. You report how this is especially a problem for women who are in sort of fragile, even abusive relationships with their children's dads. When it comes to this question about asking about the biological father of one's children, why is that a problem?
It's basically an interrogation into their sexual history. It's often embarrassing and humiliating to answer these questions. In some cases, they might not be in touch with the father, or they have a fragile, co-parenting relationship with the father that they don't want to ruin, and they think that would be not in the child's best interest.
There is also a financial rationale, which is that states want to recoup anything they can from a biological father. Is it effective at going after fathers who are not paying child support?
No, it does not. One important point is that a lot of these fathers are very poor themselves. They don't have a lot of money to provide in child support. They pay back very little to the government.
Another of your reports, Eli, looked at an interesting dynamic in the state of Utah, where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints plays an outsized role in filling that gap left between government assistance and people in need. What does a religious organization, the LDS Church, have to do with TANF, which is a federal public assistance program?
The way that it works is the state of Utah actually takes credit for the charitable work of the LDS Church, and the LDS Church does a lot of charitable work. It counts it as the state's welfare spending, and that has allowed the state of Utah to get out of spending $75 million that it would have otherwise been required to under federal law.
But does that mean that people that apply for TANF state assistance funds are actually going through the church's own requirements? And are those religious requirements that can discriminate based on religion?
Right. So, yes, it does sometimes mean that, but it can be explicit or implicit. I talked to a lot of people who said that they were explicitly suggested or instructed by the state of Utah. They were denied welfare, and then they were told, why don't you try going to the LDS Church instead? They have a better welfare program than we do. Or it can happen implicitly, which is just that welfare has become so hard to get. But then when they do, there's a term in Utah called bishop roulette, which means depending on the bishop you ask for welfare, the outcome could be very different. So if you're a single mother who's had sex out of wedlock, you might be judged by a bishop for that. Or if you're in the LGBTQ community, you might not receive welfare for that reason.
Have there been any legal challenges? And has the LDS Church responded in any way to your reporting?
To my knowledge, there have been no legal challenges. And to your other question, yes, the church has responded. They point out that millions of people across the state, the country, and the world have benefited from the LDS Church's charitable efforts, first of all, and that secondly, the church shouldn't be confused with a government agency.
After all of your reporting on these experiences, what's the big takeaway and the lessons from TANF, its legacy, and its future?
Well, I think the big question now is, has TANF failed? A lot of single mothers just choose not to apply anymore because all of the paperwork that you have to fill out, all of the programs you have to go to, parenting classes, drug testing, all to get $100 or $200. It's not really a safety net for these families. And so the question now before Congress is whether there needs to be a new kind of safety net for this century.
The series of reports is available on ProPublica's website. Eli Hager with ProPublica's new Southwest Bureau. Welcome to Phoenix, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A year out of office, former President Trump faces a series of investigations looking into his role in the January 6th riots, potential fraud in his family businesses, and sexual assault allegations. Those probes could come to a head in the new year and could impact his political future. Despite that, and no longer holding office, Trump remains a key figure in the Republican Party. Joining us to discuss Trump's legal battles and his influence on the GOP is David Fahrenthold, who covers the Trump family and their businesses for the Washington Post. David, welcome back to the NewsHour. Always good to have you here. Let's start in New York with those two parallel probes, a civil one and a criminal one, looking into the Trump businesses. The civil probe is by the New York Attorney General Letitia James, the criminal one by James and the Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance. Your reporting has found that Mr. Trump's legal bills, up to the tune of $1.6 million, are being paid for by the Republican Party. Is there precedent for that? And what did they tell you about why they're doing that?
There's no precedent for this. Just sort of step back and explain why there's no precedent. Former President Trump is not a Republican candidate. He's not a Republican office holder. And the investigations he's facing have nothing to do with his time in office. They all predate. They focus on his business in the years before he ran for president. So there's no connection to the Republican Party or Republican office holders involved here. But the Republican Party is still paying this money. And obviously Trump has a pot of money in his pocket. He has money in his business. He could afford this, but they're paying his bills anyway. And what they say, what the Republican Party says is, well, we see this as a political attack on Trump, a famous Republican. This is Democrats out to get him in New York. And so we're happy to pay his bills. What I think is really going on here is that Trump, although he's out of office and is not running, is a linchpin in Republican fundraising efforts. He is the key to the RNC's fundraising future. And if he were to turn on them, if he were to leave, if he were to talk bad about them, that could be devastating. So they may be paying to sort of keep him in their to keep themselves in his good graces.
So let's talk a little bit about a couple of these investigations for anyone who hasn't been following along. That civil probe is a fraud investigation, basically, right? That looking into whether or not he overvalued his company's assets to get loans and then undervalued them to pay fewer taxes. And he's been called to testify in that in early January. Is there any chance that happens, David?
There is a chance it happens. I don't think it will happen in a few days on January 6th. Because Trump is fighting it on the grounds that, as you said, there's two investigations here. He's been called to testify in this civil one, where what's at stake is a potential lawsuit. But he's also being investigated on basically the same issues for a criminal investigation that could end in criminal charges. And what he is saying is that, well, look, I've been called to testify about the civil probe, but if I say anything that helps prosecutors, it'll be used against me in the criminal probe. So, you know, my right against self-incrimination should protect me from this. I don't know how a judge is going to view that, but I do think it's going to take a little while. It's not going to happen January 6th.
What about that criminal probe? What do we know about
experience? That was a begrudging thought.
Use Greenlight to turn safe.
Yeah, I think Hamilton is legitimately the best American musical that has ever been staged in the history of our great musical tradition.
Please, go online or call now.
Even if she stabs you.
On the year, all of us at Mattress Firm.
By giving wildly different valuations of the same property at the same time to tax officials and to lenders. You know, there's some there's some leeway that everybody who owns real estate does, but where Trump's example is so outrageous, where the difference is so big, that amounts to fraud under New York law.
So, David, you mentioned he obviously doesn't hold office now. He has hinted at a 2024 run. Could any of these investigations or probes impact his political future?
Certainly. I mean, I don't think anybody believes that even if he were convicted of a low-level felony in New York, that would mean he would never run or people would never vote for him. Obviously, he's overcome things that would have ended the careers of other politicians, and he has a strong base of support. But, you know, there may be things that would come out in these investigations or in a potential lawsuit or trial that would change the way people view him. You know, he's also got other investigations focused on his conduct as president, both related to January 6th and the efforts to overturn the election. Those could also damage his political reputation. But I think we've watched Trump's career long enough to know that it's really hard to predict how damaging information about Trump, even true revelations about what he did, will affect how people vote, consider him and vote for him.
David Farenthal always has the must-reads in the Washington Post. We're going to continue to follow your work and these stories. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
NFL legend John Madden died yesterday at the age of 85. Jeffrey Brown looks now at what he meant to the game, particularly after he stopped coaching.
This is it, Curtis.
January 9, 1977, Pasadena, California.
The 11th Super Bowl is underway.
The Oakland Raiders hoist head coach John Madden onto their shoulders, celebrating the team's first Super Bowl championship. 10 years later, Madden told the NewsHour of his straightforward philosophy of dealing with players.
They show up when I told them to, and when we talked and taught, if they paid attention, and then if they went out and played like heck, when you talk, what else is there? What other rules do you need? I mean, I don't care if they had beards or, sideburns or bell-bottom pants or tied their shoes or not.
But a decade of coaching at a Hall of Fame level was just the start for John Madden. In a 3-decade career as an exuberant everyman broadcaster, he would go on to change the way the game was watched and understood, becoming a preeminent face and voice of football. He started at CBS alongside the late Pat Summerall. They quickly became the network's top announcing duo. From 1979 to 2009, Madden won 16 Emmy Awards and covered 11 Super Bowls for 4 networks.
Here's a corner, safety corner.
He broke down complicated plays using his Telestrator video chalkboard and entertained millions with his signature sound effects.
And boom, the ball's there. He gets walls. Boom, stay on your feet. Boom. He gets knocked right out of the screen.
He told the NewsHour how he saw his job in the booth.
What I try and do is not show the obvious. That I know if Joe Morris runs the ball around the right end and has a big play, everyone's going to see that anyway. What I try and do is look ahead to find how it happened or why it happened.
And there was more that continues to this day with Madden NFL football, one of the most successful video game empires of all time. Today, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell said in a statement that nobody loved football more than Coach. He was football. One of his great broadcasting partnerships at both ABC and NBC was with Al Michaels, who told me earlier today why he thinks Madden was, quote, as important as anybody in the history of football.
Well, there have been a number of really great coaches. So John gets into that category because he had the highest winning percentage of any coach in history who won 100 or more games. So on one level, you have him in the pantheon of coaches. On the next level, he created a new template in broadcasting and became maybe the most iconic broadcaster of his time. So you've got that. And then he went out and created a video game, and he was immersed in the production and the development of that game. He didn't just lend his name to it. And that made millions and millions and millions of young fans for the National Football League. So when you combine all of those three, that's why I say when you look at the whole body of work, there was no more important man in the history of the National Football League.
He is often credited so much with changing sports broadcasting, bringing in that everyman aspect, the preparation for each game. You were there with him. What was the most important lesson or thing you saw in him?
I think what made John, among other things, was his genuineness. And he worked very hard in preparation. He already knew a ton going in, and then he would immerse himself to the nth degree and get into the forensics of everything. And I think one of the things with John is he would take things that were seemingly complicated and make them simple and relevant and accessible to the audience. So when you hear a broadcaster talk about a 3 technique, only a football coach or a football player or somebody totally immersed in the game would know what that is. John would never use phrases like that. He'd explain what that was, and then he had a lot of fun doing it. And with the telestrator and the buckets of Gatorade dumped on coaches and telestrating what took place right there, John was the whole package.
He's one of those people, so many millions in the culture feel like we know him personally, but you really did. What was he like personally? Was the person we saw on TV, was that really him?
Exactly, Jeffrey, that was him. And to me, one of the most wonderful things about having been his partner for 7 years is the meals that we would have away from the work environment. Obviously, we were in the game or in the booth and preparing for it. That's one thing. But just to go to dinner or to lunch or to breakfast with John and talk about anything and everything. John was a very well-read man. John was a man who understood everything that was going on in the world. John was a very curious man. And he traveled across the country in that bus, and he got to see what we call, those of us who live on either coast, flyover country. We fly over it. John drove through it, back and forth hundreds of times, and got to know the people and what made people tick.
You know, you spent so much time with him. You're talking about in the booth, you're talking about on the bus, I guess, and restaurants, hotels. Give me an anecdote.
We're having dinner one night in Green Bay, and French onion soup. I don't want the onions. I hate the onions, but I love the broth, the crouton, and the cheese. So we're at dinner, and I ordered French onion soup without the onions in Green Bay. And he said, "What? What are you doing?" I said, "John, I just love the other parts of it." So he had the chef come out, and John was laughing hysterically, and he had the chef come out and explain how you make French onion soup without the onions. So that was John. He was a riot in so many ways.
That's a great story. X's and O's of French onion soup too, huh?
Right. You name it, he had it, I know.
You know, it's interesting to think that for younger generations, of course, he's better known for the video games than for the broadcasting that he did with you and so many others.
With John, even though you might not remember him as a coach, and maybe you caught him toward the end of his broadcasting career, but he's made millions of fans with that game. That people, everybody, every kid I knew through the years, and even to this day, they play Madden. They've learned football through the Madden game, and that's made the NFL millions and millions more fans.
All right, Al Michaels on the life and legacy of the great John Madden. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
A man who clearly loved the game and made us love it too. Our thoughts are with his friends and family. Meanwhile, on the NewsHour Online, the tight-knit Hmong American community's annual New Year's celebrations were put on hold last year due to the pandemic, but they are back on this year, even as
10 minutes. And if you do, we'll say
Madden great was that he believed in the viewer. He believed in defense as they would be learning about Turducken and the Madden Cruiser. He was the ultimate football guy, and he is already sorely missed. Here now to honor the Hall of Famer is another member enshrined in Canton, Super Bowl champion and legendary New York Jets quarterback Joe Namath. Thank you, sir, for joining me this evening. What did John Madden mean to the game from your perspective?
Well, you covered a whole lot of the good things, of course, and from my perspective, I knew John, and I also knew several of the guys that he coached. We kind of crossed over there. I played with the Jets against the Raiders when John was there. And Kenny Stabler is a buddy, and he used to tell me stories about John. Jim Otto, these guys that played under John, loved him. I mean, he was a straight shooter. He was down to earth. He didn't hold back on things, but he treated these guys, he treated people the way he wanted people to be treated, with respect. And when we're talking about the way he conveyed the football knowledge of his to the millions of fans out here, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And so we lost one of a kind, and my condolences certainly go out to his family. But, you know, there was a time when John started this all Madden team, and we were sitting in a dressing room. And I was sitting right beside a guy that was so special as well, Walter Payton. And I'm thinking, man, this guy is something, and John is something. Just where I was at that time, I was so thankful and so fortunate to be there. John just made us all feel so good, and we admired him a great deal.
It strikes me that just as you were so critical as a part of this in the early days of the success of the NFL, John Madden was essential to the NFL becoming the dominant sport, the sport that has a day devoted to it, the sport that really drives America in every respect in a way that football, pro football, had not been before. It really is amazing to think about how much of an impact he had on making the game, America's game, at the center of our lives. In terms of anything like him, do you think that we're ever going to see anyone have that kind of impact, to be able to go from the coaching experience to the popularizer of the game, to someone who democratizes it in a sense? Or was he just someone who was just one of a kind who can never be repeated?
Well, I think it was someone that was one of a kind, no doubt about that. But as far as someone else stepping up, getting out there and winning the hearts and the admiration and the respect of people out there that admire the football sport, I hope someone else comes along like that. And also, you mentioned the NFL. It is the NFL, but John was in the AFL. We were in the AFL to start out with, you see. And the things weren't always polite, comfy, cozy, so to speak, between the two leagues.
To say the least.
Yeah. But there was a nice, happy merger after we had to prove ourselves and win a championship against them.
Yeah, well, I mean, you say a nice, happy merger, but what was it that Al Davis said about it? He refused to go to the meeting because he said, "Remember Yalta." I mean,
he was beautiful. He was terrific. Yes. What an owner he was. A smart man, and a New Yorker to start with. Al was wonderful.
I grew up, as so many of us did, listening to John Madden and thinking of him as being the definition of a broadcaster. Someone that could entertain even when the game wasn't entertaining. Is there some aspect of his call, or one call in particular, a game that he called, that sticks out in your mind as being, an example of something you'll never forget that he said on the air?
Oh man, I heard the things you said about John initially there before I came on, and I got tickled, of course. He was a smart man, very intelligent man, but he knew how to convey his feelings to the people that he respected. Again, he respected people. He wanted them to enjoy what he was saying, as well as teach them about the game. We saw him with that telestrator, the way he had handled it. We'd see him mess it up and do whatever, say things that were laughable, and we laughed along with him. We never laughed at him. He was sharp, and he was teaching us football. And millions upon millions of people today are saddened.
He was a great teacher, and thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining me tonight. I want to thank you all for watching Fox.
And time flies. That's tonight's Readout. I'll see you here tomorrow. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Tonight on All In, where we stand as we approach year 3 of the pandemic. As cases explode again, the CDC defends a decision to cut COVID isolation.
We followed numerous areas of science in making this important decision.
Then a measure of justice in the Epstein saga, the significance of tonight's guilty verdict for Ghislaine Maxwell. Plus, a surprising area where Democrats are having success against the push to undermine democracy. And the truth about the great shoplifting freakout of 2021. The state now proposing a bounty for parents who find banned books in school. All In starts right now.
Was justice served?
It was. I think the jury got this right. From the outset, the defense was rather implausible. This was a woman who was arranging the transport of young girls, including underage girls, to Epstein's house. Also, there were flights to his island. It's hard to imagine that anything was involved other than sex trafficking or the abuse of these girls. There was no explanation really offered by the defense as to why she was effectively harvesting girls from playgrounds and other locations. So I think they got it right. The fact is that she didn't take the stand because I don't think she had anything to say when confronted with these facts. So she's now looking at a maximum of 65 years. We're probably more towards the middle of that in terms of the guidelines. If you do a quick back of the envelope calculation, you're probably around 12 or 15 years for a first offender. But she has aggravators because obviously this involved underage girls and their abuse.
Coming out today, I'm Craig. I'm a reporter with the Washington Post.
Everybody remembers
the week in the Big Ten.
This from him. Chris Christie's no dummy. He knew full well he was going to draw a reaction from Trump, but that didn't stop him. And after Trump responded, Christie fired back with an even more direct shot.
I'm not going to get into a back and forth with Donald Trump, but what I will say is this. When I ran for re-election in 2013, I got 60% of the vote. When he ran for re-election, he lost to Joe Biden. I'm happy to have that comparison stand up.
Just as he's ratcheting up his criticism of Donald Trump, the former New Jersey governor is sitting down with, of all places, CNN for a 1-hour special. Now, he won't be finding many Republican primary voters there, but he's clearly trying to build up his support, and he isn't alone in wanting to see Trump ousted from the top of the GOP heap. Other recent commentary from some longtime Trump supporters, or at least critics of Democrats, suggests there could be more to this, like conservative talk show host Dave Rubin. Pretty big deal among the MAGA set. His words hold a lot of sway with Trump fans, which is why it was surprising to hear him explicitly call for the former president not to run in 2024.
What I would prefer to happen is that Trump acts as the advocate, keep doing the rallies, keep fighting the media, keep doing all the dirty work, be the bodyguard so that, say, a DeSantis, Tim Scott ticket maybe could get through. Let DeSantis, who I think is 43 years old, he's done an incredible job in Florida. He's willing to fight. But let Trump do the dirty work. Let him take the hits from the media. Let him draw the people to the rallies and go be the statesman, DeSantis. I know Florida wouldn't be happy to potentially lose him.
Trump. That doesn't sound like Trump. No, it doesn't sound.
I know. So hey, Don, if you watch Megyn Kelly's show, and I have no doubt that you do, my personal message to you is think about putting your ego in check for the first time in your life.
And even Fox and Friends, arguably Trump's very favorite cable news show, and also the one he loves to hate, is offering advice the former president definitely will not listen to about the prospect of a 2024 bid.
He's got to tone it down. It can't be the same way. Everyone's got to get better. I think the president's got to get better. Had to have learned for the last 4 years.
The conservative media clearly dropping hints of an opening for a new nominee a couple of years out. And other major Republican candidates clearly trying to tiptoe around the issue. The New York Times' Maggie Haberman reported that Trump's former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, told multiple people he's running regardless of whether Trump is in the field. And it's worth noting that Mike Pence also spoke at the same conference as Christie and has been heavily rumored to be eyeing a 2024 bid of his own. You'd have to go back to 1960 for the last time either party nominated a non-incumbent candidate who didn't face heavy opposition in the primaries. That was Richard Nixon, who was a sitting vice president, and he lost.
And it's very demoralizing for both the patients and our staff.
Wow, Secretary Sebelius, as the former Health and Human Services Secretary, when you listen to what Dr. Phillips just laid out there, what do you make of the situation that this country is in right now? And what, if anything, do you think the Biden administration should do differently, could have done differently?
Well, Jim, I think we're in the midst of really two viral infections simultaneously. So Kansas still hasn't had many Omicron cases. As the last report from the Health and Environment Department said, we have about 25 confirmed cases of Omicron, over 1,000 cases of Delta in the hospital. So we're still really being pressed by the Delta variant, and people are hospitalized, mostly unvaccinated, and the staff is stretched thin. We have hospitals that are sending patients all over the place. We have yet to have the Omicron wave, which is coming, I'm afraid, later in January for the middle of the country, and we're going to pile that on to a continued Delta variant. No question that we have a testing problem in the United States. We've been talking about testing since March of 2020, and we have not gotten ahead of the curve, and that's really not great news at this point in time. So people are
like get together with loved ones for the holidays, or go to dinner, or to a movie, or visit their friends. And understandably, people feel that those things come with an acceptable level of risk now they're vaccinated. So that leaves us where we are, which is the sort of politics in the broad sense of like public opinion, institutional appetites across the nation are politics of normalcy, a sort of willing things to be normal. People are over it, and I get it. I feel that way too. But then there's the virus, which is just like, doesn't care. Just a little piece of DNA floating around, and it's still very much there. And the most blunt tools we have to contain it, like what are called non-pharmaceutical interventions, like lockdowns, like shutting things down, they're just not available as a practical and political matter, as Dr. Fauci alluded to, and he was not wrong. And that all leads us to this kind of strange period we're in now, which is the muddling through phase, muddling through the Omicron wave, which we know is going to be very disruptive because that transmission's so high. I mean, you heard Dr. Fauci acknowledge that in what I thought was striking language, and saying it factored in the CDC's decision to shorten the recommended length of quarantine. There are going to be so many people testing positive for Omicron that long periods of quarantine could seriously disrupt the normal functioning of our society. We've already seen flashes of that as industries are hit with outbreaks, from airlines canceling thousands of flights over the last few days to sports leagues canceling or postponing games. On Monday, a record 96 NFL players tested positive in one day. Broadway shows have been canceled. City MD clinics in New York City have shut down because of staffing shortages, on and on. The big question is, so how do we avoid the worst disruptions while also minimizing deaths, suffering, misery, severe illness? We know there's a key problem standing in the way of that, which is that we've got a huge pool of unvaccinated people, tens of millions.